Welcome back to the messy shop. The truck's still here, nice and dusty. Transmission's still sitting where we left it. It's just that time of year we're doing little projects here and there and nothing has time to get cleaned up and everything's a mess. I mentioned in our last video that I'm gonna try and get back on the truck soon. I don't have a whole lot of time right now to work on it, but I do wanna try and get started a little bit. My goal for today is to try and take a look at that oil leak and diagnose that and start to work on getting our space prepped to work on the transmission so that when I have time to do that, we can get into that. I'm gonna start by trying to straighten up the work area just a little bit. Maybe 2% better. If you remember from our last video when we were working on this truck, which I know has been a couple months, we took the transmission out and there is a pretty significant leak coming from the rear of the engine. I'm not entirely sure if that's coming from the oil pan gasket or the rear main seal or a combination of both, more than likely. But I'm gonna go ahead and start by pulling the flex plate off so I can visually inspect the rear main seal and see how it's looking. That being said, I think I've already pretty much decided that I'm gonna replace it because since the transmission's out, it's pretty cheap to replace and it's a lot of work to take the transmission out to have to replace it in the future. No problem for the 3/8 impact. Now is it gonna fall on my head? Well, it'll sling oil everywhere. All right, let's see if we're gonna need a puller to get off this or if it'll just pull off. No, it'll just wiggle right off. There we go. It does look to me like there's a little bit of oil down there on the seal. Seal doesn't look to be in the best condition. I think our oil pan gasket is definitely leaking, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and replace that rear main seal as well. There's also a gasket behind this rear cover. Not entirely sure if I should try and pull that off and replace it. I do see a little bit of film there, but I don't know if that's just from being splashed up by the flex plate spinning around or if there's actually a leak coming out there. So I think what I'll do is I'll take a look at the parts and what the costs are, but unless the cost is outrageous, I'm probably gonna go ahead and pull that rear cover off, replace the gasket behind it, and replace the rear main seal. And I'm definitely gonna do the oil pan gasket because that's definitely leaking. So next thing I want to tackle today is working on getting our work area set up to start working on the transmission whenever I have time for that. I'm not going to get started on that today because I want to be able to do it when I've got a good chunk of time to get the whole thing done and not leave it open for a long period of time, but I have decided that I am going to go ahead and rebuild it. After looking at what the parts cost would be to rebuild it versus what buying a remanufactured one is and looking at what's involved with actually rebuilding it, that's the route I decided to go. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that complicated of a rebuild. There aren't that many special tools that I need to get, and it's going to be a good difference in price. So that's the route we're going to go. But I want to have a work area to work on that, and I want to use this as my workbench. This is a Harbor Freight scaffold. You've probably seen me in some previous videos using this as a workbench. I really like it. I know it's a scaffold and not a workbench, but it's, you know, it's on wheels. I can roll it around like this, and it's got, I think it's a 900-pound rating. So it's a nice heavy steel frame. It's fully adjustable. So I've got it set to where it's a nice comfortable work height for when I'm standing. But if I work on something and I want to sit down on a stool or whatever, I can adjust it really easily if I want to. Or say even, you know, working on this transmission, if I want to lower it 6 inches because I'm working on a higher portion of it, and rather than having to reach up, it's really nice to be able to do that. The frame itself is nice and solid for how I'm using it. Probably the weakest link for me is the top. I think it's a 1/2 inch plywood, and it's decent plywood, but it's only 1/2 inch, and there's no supports underneath it. It's just supported on the outside. I found this piece of plywood here in the shop that was on this shelf that was on this back wall when we cleaned it out. And it's almost a perfect size to fit on this. I just need to trim it about 6 inches off the end. Pull a couple nails out of here. So this has got about a 1-inch overhang coming off the edge of the table, and I like that. This is just the size that this random piece of plywood was. So in terms of trying to attach this to the top, I think what I'm gonna do is this has got these spring-loaded locking tabs here. So I think I'm just gonna use these tabs here and lock it down, and that locks it down pretty good. But because I've got that overhang, I need to cut a little notch so that I can get it centered. And that's all there is to it. Now I've got an extra double thickness. It's a lot sturdier. So I took a look at the parts that we're gonna need for the truck, and the price to get a kit that includes the rear main seal and that rear cover gasket was basically the same price as buying the rear main seal by itself. So definitely gonna go that route. We'll pull the rear main cover off, replace that gasket, and do the new seal, as well as doing the oil pan gasket. So those parts are on the way. I think I'm gonna go ahead and get started on what I can do now while we wait for those parts. And go ahead and drain the oil out and pull the rear cover off and get all the gasket material cleaned up. I'm sure there'll be some scraping and that kind of stuff to get it ready. Man, this is the way to change the oil. Just take the transmission out and then you just sit under here, camp out. While the oil is draining, I'll go ahead and pull these bolts out of the rear cover. There's these two long ones on the bottom, which I guess are technically oil pan bolts. They hold the rear cover on as well. And then I think these are all 13s. We'll just slide off there. We're gonna need to pry it off. There we go. Seems like this gasket wasn't doing too bad. At least around the top. We can get under a corner of this. And then we got a bunch of cleaning up to do. So I got the rear cover off. I was gonna pull the oil pan too, but I got thinking about it and was realizing, you know, I don't know exactly when I'm gonna get back to this. The part should be here in a couple days, but I don't know when I'm gonna have time to get back on this, and I don't really wanna leave the whole bottom end of the engine open for an extended period of time. So I'm gonna wait to pull that off until I've actually got the parts and got the time to work on it. So I think that'll do for this one. Next video, we're gonna be back outside, out in the woods, doing that prep work to get ready to get the pigs moved out there. Then hopefully we'll be back here in the shop working on this some more. It's hard to find time to get all this done in the summer, particularly with all the animals and everything we have going on. It's hard to do these kind of particularly bigger projects like this transmission in the shop because there's just not much time to dedicate to it. And that's just the way it goes. Obviously, this wasn't a planned project. If I planned it, I would have done it over the winter, but that's just how things go. So we'll keep working at it a little bit at a time here and there as I can find time to work on it. And there's plenty of other stuff to work on along the way too. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you back here on our next one.